I'm sure some of you remember a video that I made a couple weeks ago, well, maybe a couple months ago at this point, talking about how Cyberdark Impact kind of gets a bad rap, even though it's really not that bad of set in the grand scheme of things. And one of the things that a lot of people commented was, well, Doug, what do you think is the worst set? And a lot of people answered those comments saying, well, of course, Shadow Specters is the worst set if we're not counting Cyberdark Impact. And in today's video, I'm once again going to debunk that. I'm sort of in this weird spot where I'm perfectly fine making fun of older structure decks that people hold near and dear to their hearts, but I sort of want to defend the bad packs that people hated from a long time ago. And that's what we're going to do with Shadow Specters. So Shadow Specters was released in late 2013, and it was one of the worst selling packs of all time. In fact, you can go to a YCS today, well, not today, but nowadays you can go to YCS, and for some of the side events, actually many of the side events, you will still get Shadow Specter packs as like the entry packs or the prize packs sometimes, which tells you that Konami has a whole bunch of these sitting around, and they still have not been able to get rid of them for, well, I guess 5 years later now. So what happened with Shadow Specters? Well, part of the problem was that it was released in late 2016. So this was released when Dragon Rulers were at their second Tier 0 format, basically. They had Dragon Ravine and Sixth Sense and all that sort of stuff. So that's really bad timing. In fact, it kind of reminds me of Extreme Force. Now, Extreme Force isn't a really great set. It only has a couple good cards, a lot less than Shadow Specters actually, but Extreme Force is released at a time where not many of the cards in the set can actually make a huge impact on the meta outside of Heavy Metal Foe's Electromite, and even then, I don't know if that'll be enough to sort of totally dethrone Spirals. But you can kind of see the parallel here. A lot of the times when sets come out during Tier 0 formats, they don't directly impact whatever deck is Tier 0 or make a new deck appear that can actually combat that Tier 0 deck. People just sort of don't buy them, and that's kind of what happened with Shadow Specters. But there's a lot of good cards in here, so I think the first two that I have to get out of the way, well, one is Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand. Pretty much everyone knows this is like the best card in the set. It's played in a variety of decks and still to this day played in most rank 8 strategies. There aren't a lot of those left, but the ones that are totally dedicated towards rank 8s tend to play this card. Its effect has become a little less relevant once Kaijus came out, and that's probably why not every deck plays this anymore. A lot of people just play Hope Harbinger because that can stop all the powerful spell cards in the game, but people still play this card, and people played this card up until like a year ago. So this is probably one of the best cards in the set. I think most people know that. The other really good card is Ghost Rick Alucard. I don't think this card needs much introduction. Before we had Gram Pulse, you pretty much had to play Ghost Rick Alucard to take out back row, and when this card came out, rank 3s really lacked spot removal. I mean, this is before Dante even. This is before, not the Dante spot removal, but it's before a lot of the really good rank 3s, and Alucard helped out a lot of rank 3 decks. We didn't have Break Sword, we didn't have Gram Pulse, none of those spot removal effects, but we did have Ghost Rick Alucard, and this could sort of deal with face down monsters and face down back row, so it's pretty cool, and a lot of people played it. So those two cards are sort of like the go-to cards when people defend this set, and they say, well, at least it had two good cards, but it actually has a lot more. So it did have Return of the Monarchs. This card was incredibly popular, not only in the full power Monarch decks, but even some like Tribute Sun decks that were popular right before the Monarch structure deck came out, and this card was a staple 3 of in pretty much every single Monarch variant, and I think it was one of the first cards to really take advantage of the not having an not being able to summon cards from the extra deck. This was sort of one of the first cards to really do that, and sort of made the future Monarch deck. I mean, that's sort of what the future Monarch deck all revolved around, was having all these effects that were really good as long as you didn't mind not summoning from the extra deck. So Return of the Monarch sort of appeared in Shadow Specters first. We can also look at Mistake. This card has popped up in a ton of side decks and even had some top WCQ finishes back in 2015, but Mistake has sort of popped in and out of the metagame time and time again, and even to this day, this card isn't that bad. Anytime there's a really search-reliant format, Mistake is fantastic. Even with Ash Blossom as competition, Floodgates are always going to be sometimes better than Hand Traps, just because they permanently stop all those effects. In this case, Mistake permanently stops searching, and yeah, Mistake came out in there as a secret rare. It was actually one of the more sought-after cards in that set. Also, maybe not on the more competitive side of things, but on like the semi-competitive side of things, we have Mythic Tree Dragon and Mythic Water Dragon. These cards did not see a ton of play right when they came out. They saw some experimentation, but most people just played the standard Dragon Ruler build or the Dragoonity Ruler build. Not a lot of people played the Mythic Rulers until the Dragon Rulers were limited. But when the Dragon Rulers were limited, these cards were basically staples. Mythic Water Dragon paired with so many cards in that deck. Not only could you obviously use it with like Tidal and stuff, but you could discard it for trade-in if you were playing the Blue Eyes engine, and just a whole bunch of things, and made it really good. One of the cool plays that I liked was you could summon a Scrap Dragon, pop a card, and then special summon Mythic Water Dragon from your hand to make a Divine Dragon Knight Felgrand. So that's a pretty cool play. Both those cards were in this set. Maybe on the more casual things, but I really have to mention it because my first regional top was with this deck. Aratama came out in the set, so a lot of people think Aratama and Nikitama came out in the same set. They actually didn't. Aratama came out in Shadow Specters, Nikitama came a couple months later. But this card's really good, and it's basically, once again, a staple in the deck that it's made for. Almost all Spirit decks are going to play 3 of this card, no matter which type of Spirit deck they are, even though most Spirit decks nowadays are just going to be Shino Birds. And in that deck, this is definitely a 3 of, because it searches any Spirit monster, and I don't think this thing will ever really get a replacement, unless there was like a monster that when it was normal summon you added 2 Spirit monsters to your hand. But outside of that happening, which I don't think it will, Aratama is probably going to always appear in Spirit decks. Now, back to the more competitive side of things, we have both White Dragon Wyverburster and Black Dragon Collapse Serpent. These cards popped up in so many different Chaos decks, maybe not right when they came out, and these cards, they were good to an extent, but once again, because when this pack came out, there was sort of this weird thing going on pretty much for all of 2013, where instead of like nowadays, or instead of olden days when you really wanted light and dark monsters to take advantage of like Chaos Sorcerer and Blackluster Soldier, during this time period you actually really wanted fire, wind, earth, and water monsters for the Dragon Rulers, and these cards really only go in Chaos decks. I will say though that these things did have a lot of success when Shaddolls came out. A lot of people played these cards in particular just because you could constantly gain advantage while you were either synchro summoning with them or fusion summoning with them, so they were pretty cool, and a lot of people played them. Also, Bujintai Kagasuchi was in this deck, or in this pack, and a lot of people know about this card because it recently saw play in most Infernoid variants before Zodiacs were sort of neutered on the ban list, because you could make this card using Zoo and then mill a whole bunch of cards, and when the Bujin, man, what is that card called? The new Bujin Pendulum monster came out a couple sets after Grass. That was like an OCG import. When that card came out, there was a combo in Infernoid Zoo where you could actually summon 2 of these things and mill 10 cards, and that was absolutely insane. Now, that wasn't around for very long until Zoo got hit, but it was around for a little bit, and a lot of people liked that combo, including myself. I thought it was pretty cool. We haven't seen a lot of cards that just mill all that stuff for pretty much free, and that was one of the things that Zodiacs and Bujintai Kagasuchi let you do. So that was in the set. And then the last thing that's worth mentioning probably is Melee of the Trees. Now, this card, it hasn't seen that much competitive play, about as much as Aratama actually, but this thing is always something that pops up in plant decks, even if they're not summoning it all the time. It's basically completely power crept by the new Plant Link monster, and in some cases it's power crept by the Burning Abyss Link monster because it basically does the same thing. But this card is pretty good, and it was very hyped when it originally was announced to be in this set. People were freaking out about this card, sending stuff like Dandelion or reviving stuff like Lone Fire Blossom. Seemed very appealing to a lot of players, and it was in Shadow Specters. So what can we learn by looking at Shadow Specters? We can learn that a lot of the community's perception on how good a set is how good it is in comparison to the format that it's released in, and that makes sense to an extent, because when new sets come out, and this is sort of like the power creep thing, when a new set comes out, you're sort of going to hope that the cards are at least better than what's currently out. But like I said at the beginning of the video, when you release a set during a tier 0 format and like none of the cards really make an impact on whatever deck is the best deck, no one's going to buy this set. People are just going to completely forget about it. And I think that's what's kind of happening to Extreme Force. Now, I don't want to say that the main set of Extreme Force is very good, but the imports and I think like the TCG exclusives are at least halfway decent, not to mention the Extreme Force Special Edition is coming out, and like many of you have probably heard, Cyframe Gear Gamma is going to be a reprint in there, and they're also going to give us the anti-hand trap quick play spell way earlier than we were going to get it originally. So Extreme Force is turning out to be not the worst set in the world, and I wouldn't even be surprised if in a couple of years I'll be making a video just like this for Extreme Force. Although I think objectively, Shadow Specters had a lot more meta-relevant cards than Extreme Force ever will, which I think is pretty crazy because, like I said, on that video that I made about Cyberdark Impact, almost all the comments were saying, okay, if that's not the worst set, it must be Shadow Specters, because this set sold so terribly and not a lot of the cards are relevant anymore. But a lot of these cards did have meta relevance for a very long time, up until probably 2015 and 2016 is when we saw a lot of these cards sort of fall out of favor. But even nowadays, you still see Mistake Played, you still see Divine Dragon Knight Felgran, sometimes you see Aratama, sometimes you see Malay of the Tree, and it's kind of interesting because a set that has so much bad rap just by the community, I mean, the community hates this set, and Konami probably hates the set too because they have so much of it lying around, it actually wasn't that bad. So hopefully anytime there's one of these sets that comes out where you guys are like, okay, this is the worst set they've ever released, maybe next time you'll kind of look at it and say, how many of these cards actually made a difference in the decks that I played, and will this pack not be terrible a couple years from now? Because I think if a pack sort of has that sort of longevity, it actually is better than most around. So here was my video trying to convince you guys that Shadow Specters wasn't a terrible set. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you later. Bye.